And we are live. Hello there. Welcome to the Dr. Lisa Show here on KUHS Denver, the stream. We are broadcasting internationally, and wherever you are, we're really glad you're here. I have an amazing guest with me, as you can tell in the studio today. But before we get into our conversation, I want to just remind you that this show is spiritually multilingual. Remember, my tagline is inspiring a renaissance of spirit. And over this past year, I've noticed that the conversations I've had with people have become more soulful, more deep, more maybe spiritual. And yet, I don't want you to be turned off because the language doesn't match the way you think about things. So, if on this show we say God and you want to hear universal energy, awesome. If we say meditate and you want to hear prayer, great. If we say something that you like the concept, but you can't deal with the language, just translate, right? Because this is a multilingual show. That's the first piece. The second piece is what I'm hoping to do on this show is to help you find your authentic self. You know, there's like 1,000 books on how to be your best self, how to make sure you meditate and you floss your teeth and you say your affirmations and you exercise. You do 350 things every single day and you have no time to work or do anything else to be your best self. And this show is about finding your authentic self. Who are you? And that expressing that is your gift. Not only your gift to yourself, but in Jewish thought, that is your gift to the world. You are here to become a thread in a tapestry. And if you're supposed to be a red thread, don't try to be an orange thread or a yellow thread. If you're supposed to be an orange thread, don't worry about trying to be violet. You're supposed to be who you are, and that's your journey, is to find that self. I also want to remind you that my goal for this year, if you haven't done this yet, you still have time, is for each of us to be a philanthropist. Now remember, that can be $1 a day or $1 a week. If you think that $15 can't change somebody's life, you're wrong. Most donations for big organizations are small, and it is those small donations that change the world. So you still have time. I've been pushing the MS Society, but hey, this time of year, whatever works for you is great. And one last piece is my book. You know, I've been talking about this book all year, like, hey, I'm going to have a book out. It's out. It's a dark fire. It is a slightly raucous, spiritual, romantic adventure. There's an octopus that falls in love with a horse. There is an imaginary dog that becomes real. There's the heroine of the book is in love with a man that she's not sure if he's a vampire or not. He turns out to be a partly vampire, which is sort of exciting. And it is sort of based on, very, very, very loosely, one biblical story, very loosely, but it addresses lineage wounds. And I did that in my first novel, and I did it in my second, and that topic may actually come up today. It might. So anyway, thank you for joining us today on the show, and my guest, Charlie. Introduce yourself, Charlie.
Well, first of all, before I introduce, congratulations on the book. That's fantastic. I mean, that looks so great. I love the title.
I know, the title's great.
Dark
the cover's great.
Fire. I mean, that is, what inspired you for the
So
title?
I have to tell you that I've had this short story in my head for years. I don't know, a decade, more than a decade. And during the pandemic, I thought, well, I got nothing to do. I should write the story.
Yeah.
And I realized as I started to write that it was like a tiny, tiny short story. But every day I would go for a walk or a run or a bike ride, and the story would show up in my head. And I'd go home and I'd write that part of the story. And the characters created this story.
Wow.
And in there, the dark fire, those words repeated themselves. And eventually, by the end of the book, I realized that was the title.
That's amazing. No, it's so inspirational to hear how the whole book came about. You know, where you're actually moving and you're getting the inspiration, you're getting that download or whatever it is that writers get, and then you got to write it in. You got to get it down before you lose it, and then all of a sudden they're just like piecing it together, and all of a sudden this beautiful story comes out.
Yeah, it was. I actually said to one of my mentors, who's a very well published writer, that these characters are arguing with me. Yeah. They're writing the story. I don't know why they're doing this. She said, then you're actually writing.
Yeah,
this is good.
Right.
If the characters have taken over, it's a good story.
You know, I'm a writer as well, and I haven't written in a long time, so this is actually kind of like, you know, kind of giving me the little bit of impetus to start getting back into doing that. But like I've been in a desert for writing where there's no inspiration, nothing's coming up. I feel like it's you know, there's no water to get to the ground to bring out the you know, the storyline. And so when I hear these, how this downloaded for you, how this came about for you, how you put this together, and it's just trusting in the process, really trusting in the process that when it's time for you to write a story, you'll write the story.
Right. And then what is your process? And that was amazing to me, that I had to go for a walk or a bike ride or whatever. And honestly, that was the summer of 2020. Wow. Get up, go for a walk, come back, write that next part of the book. Oh, I'm done. Okay, well, I'll go drop my kayak in. Okay, come back. Oh, I got part of the book. It was this iterative process of physical exertion, physical interaction with the environment, the outside environment, and then writing whatever came to me.
That's so great.
It was amazing. So let's back up. Charlie, introduce yourself. Tell everyone who you are.
Well, my name is Charlie Pacello. I'm a host here at KUHS Radio TV Denver. I host a TV radio show called The Council. We've been broadcasting here for over 4 years now. We just finished up our 4th season, and it's been amazing. Over 100 and some shows. And it's been, you know, where I've had opportunities to travel and to go to Rome and Lebanon, and got to meet the Pope on one of the council. So it's just been a magical tour.
Wow.
And been doing some important work for veteran organizations. Did a Veterans Summit series where we partnered up with a group called the Trauma Sensitive Awareness Foundation and brought some amazing doctors and veterans and others who are trying to bring attention to a lot of issues concerning trauma and PTSD and sleep disturbance and flashbacks and all the things that are connected to when our nervous system and our brains and our bodies and our souls go into overdrive because of the traumatic experiences that we have, and how do we recover from that. And so one of the things that I specialize in outside of doing the council is I have my own private practice, a healing practice. Been doing it for about 10 years now. Wow. It's called Core Soul Healing. It's had different names, you know, as I was putting it together. And, and we focus on healing from PTSD, trauma, depression, dysfunctional relationships, abuse of any kind. And I come from a family of veterans, so I understand this from a very personal level. Everything that I teach is because I worked through it. And I had to work through the PTSD, the moral injury. Moral injury is such a huge component, an unaddressed component of trauma, because we're just looking at the physical symptoms. And so being able to get into that understanding of those deeper soul issues, those deeper spiritual issues that are really underlying a lot of the things that people who've experienced trauma, because what ends up happening is that at its core with trauma, there's a betrayal of the right way. It's anathema. You know, that's a Greek term meaning against the right way. And so there's a certain expectation, there's a certain belief, or you go in it with a certain ideal. You know, you go into the military with a certain ideal, and then the reality may be something completely different. Or you're going into a relationship and you're expecting that to be a certain way, and then you experience a betrayal of trust or abuse or something. They're supposed to be a certain way, there's an expectation, and then there's a breaking of that bond. And so a lot of that is underlying trauma, because our souls and our spirits are trying to reconcile that. within ourselves, and it's showing up in the symptoms as not being able to sleep, flashbacks, the mind racing out of control where you can't deal with it, the feelings that I every time I approach a certain situation or a person, or that I can't get there, I can't do it. There's that fear that rises up. So so much about it, and so that's what I've dedicated much of my life, or at least the last 10 years of my life to help people achieve that and recover.
That is so powerful, and I know you have this interesting background. I mean, not only the military, but theater and psychology and yoga, and, right? And so, was it knitting? How did knitting those together? Because so often what we do is we treat a symptom, and what you're saying is it's a soul level wound.
Yes. And
did you have to explore these other aspects to get to that awareness, or was that a personal journey that brought you to that sort of the aha moment?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and that requires a little bit of understanding of it, because it originated from my inability to be able to utilize some of the resources that the military had, because I couldn't access it. I had a discharge status that didn't allow me to be able to access what was a conventional, regular, process, psychiatry that would, okay, you're dealing with these issues, here's some medication, and go home and go deal with it. I couldn't do that. I had to find a way, because I was in such pain that the only thing I could think about was either to end my life or to try to find another way. And so I started to piece all of these things together as this, like, I'm gonna figure this out.
Right.
I'm gonna find a way to get through this and to be able to come out the other side on this. So I had hit rock bottom in my life, and it was triggered by the ending of a dysfunctional relationship, and it cracked me open, and it forced me to, it felt like somebody had, like where she lived inside of me got ripped out, and all this pain, where my soul should have been, it left. There's a sense of a big gaping hole on the inside of my chest. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in so much trouble right now.
Right.
I'm in so much trouble. I need to do something. And I wasn't praying at that time. I wasn't connected. I had become disconnected from any kind of spirituality or God or creator or anything like that. And I got on my hands and knees again. I said, all right, I need some help here, because I know I'm in a lot of trouble. And so I started piecing it all together. And prior to that moment, I was involved. Once I got out of the military, I joined, I went into acting. So, because I had become so disconnected from me that I went into acting, and it was something that I had done when I was a kid, to bring some joy back into my life. And so it was a help me to reconnect to my goodness, to my humanity. Because I was so disconnected from that part of myself that I was carrying so much by putting myself in somebody else's shoes, or creating a character, or pretending to be somebody else for a while, helped me to get outside of myself in order to get back in touch with my emotions, so that I could feel again. And I didn't realize I was doing that at the time, but that's what I ended up discovering along the way. And I had it's funny, Elisa, there was an acting coach that I had when I first got started. I went to the Stella Adler Academy of Acting in Hollywood. And he was a very colorful, very passionate person, and we were breaking down scripts, and I was getting all into it, and I was playing this king, it was Henry the II or whatever it was, Lion in Winter, and I was on the stage and I was doing the performance, and I got done, and I expected, because I had put so much work and wrote all the things, I was such a diligent and good student, and expected to have some kind of, positive response. Yes, like you've done, here. And he's like, Charlie, he says, I love you, but I didn't get anything out of that.
You did everything right by the book,
Yes.
and there was no heart or soul in the performance.
None. Zero. No connection
Wow.
to my emotional life whatsoever.
So that it was cognitive. It was theoretical,
Yes.
as opposed to soulful is a word, but connected, like physically, emotionally, spiritually. That was not there.
No. It was not connected in
Wow.
whatsoever.
And that's what he saw. And the audience then, they can't have that experience
Mm-mm.
because they're just watching somebody read lines.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And so I had become so disconnected to my emotional life, my own personal feelings, and it woke me up and figuring out how did this happen? Why did this happen? And of course, it was rooted in trauma, which I didn't know at the time, or I kind of recognized, but I was doing what most people do. I was escaping. I was medicating myself with alcohol and drugs. I was trying to, escape from my reality just to feel good and
Just pretend it's not there.
pretend it's
Right?
not
I'll
there.
just fake it till I make it, that weird whatever. I'm fine, really, I'm fine.
Yeah, I'm totally good. I'm
totally
fine.
good. It's good. That doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. It's, and then it brings on the addict, which is just
Right.
all of a sudden now I need something outside of me
Right.
in order to feel good,
Mhm.
in order to be able to push down all of this unprocessed grief and anger
Mhm.
and rage and
Mhm.
sadness and all those things. So I'm just gonna, have a few beers and a couple shots and
And I'll feel
maybe
fine.
get high and I'll be fine.
Yeah.
And it'll work in the moment. It's but it doesn't last because it has to
Right.
be replenished.
Right.
And so then your tolerance levels goes higher. At least that's what I discovered with me.
It absolutely does go higher.
and,
And then you need more.
and then you need
of
more.
the same.
Yep.
And then at some point there's never enough.
That's right. And then when you cut it off, because you've pushed down all of that stuff for so long,
Mhm.
it comes out and it's like a volcano
Mhm.
of all this, an eruption of all of these emotions coming up to the surface.
Mhm.
And if you don't have someone to guide you to understand what is going on and why it's happening, and to allow you to be able to purge it, you have to purge that in
Yes.
order to get to the trauma.
Yes.
In order to be able to understand it, interconnect it, face it, look at it, understand your shadows and all of those things. But if you can't get through past the emotional eruptions that are going to inevitably happen,
Right.
if you've been escaping from it, if you've been pushing it away,
Mhm.
you'll just go right back into that pattern. So you've got to have someone who can guide you so that you can move through it in a healthy way, so that you can really start getting into the nitty-gritty, helping you to make meaning of these experiences so that you can integrate them into your spirit, into your soul,
Mhm.
integrate the light and the dark so that you can become a whole person.
So in many ways, it's as if when you have a wound and it becomes infected,
Mm-hmm.
you have to clear the infection away before the wound can even start to heal.
Yes.
And often that is painful,
Oh my God, it is, yes.
right?
Yeah.
We just know that from a physical wound,
Mm-hmm.
that the infection is often worse than the original wound
Mm-hmm.
because, right, because we've let it fester.
Mm-hmm.
So yoga and theater, it's funny because we started the conversation about writing,
Mhm.
and you said that about creating character.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that's part of what I did in this novel and my first novel.
Mm.
And they're about healing lineage wounds, which I had no intention of writing.
Mhm.
It's just what showed up. And yet that is what I needed. And so that the process of writing and letting that flow on paper was a process of also healing a lineage wound. So a similar kind of process that didn't actually occur to me until this conversation.
Well, it's a creative process. You're
Mhm.
moving from an area of where you have been hurt or abused or experienced some kind of violence on some level, participated in destruction, and if you're a veteran, that's you've destroyed. So it's the act of creation. It's
Right.
the act of integrating and making sense and making meaning. Because when you're starting to write, you're pulling all these different pieces together,
Right.
and
Yeah.
you're creating that. And that's what to go back to the theater aspect. I ended up studying with my master's work because I spent 14 years doing theater and film out in Los Angeles, and studying with some masters and working with fantastic teachers and studying in Oxford, England, Shakespeare, and just incredible experiences. Did 60 or 70 plays, 40 or 50 films, student films, really to understand and to really get connected to my emotional life, to reawaken that. And then I moved into, and I started working with a couple doctors, and they led me to getting my master's work, and we focused on Greek theater. I went to Greece, and I went to go study over there in Greece.
Wow.
The Aesculapian healing tradition, which was the dream healing tradition.
Wow.
And utilizing your dreams as a doorway to understanding how to use the transpersonal powers to awaken the healing within you. And the incubation and being able to connect to the different powers that are there to alleviate and help you to move through the areas that you're in trouble with, emotionally, spiritually, and also to understand how theater worked in order to purge these dark emotions that kind of get stuck in us. Wow. And the Greeks used this. The ancient Greeks used theater as a means to be able to purge. Most people don't recognize that was a sacred precinct. That was a place where they had priests that represented the gods Dionysus and Apollo. And they were there, and so the whole community, all of Athens, would go there in order to connect, to grieve, to mourn, to watch these archetypal figures represented by heroes and heroines and queens and kings and different forces that are all part of us, and they'd watch it on the stage. And the people who were performing them were actually veterans, because this was a lot of these plays came about 2,500 years ago during the Peloponnesian Wars between Athens and Sparta. And so you have the great Greek tragedy playwrights, Aeschylus, who was a grunt, who was a foot soldier, Sophocles and Euripides were both generals. And so they were trying to process the battles, the wars, and they would go there and they would achieve catharsis. They'd see these horrors, these terrors, and it would help them to access within themselves those parts that they couldn't access, the inaccessible emotions and feelings that they had buried deep within. But by being able to watch it on the stage, they could purge it and eventually achieve what is called catharsis, which is a deep cleansing of the spirit and the soul.
And I'm thinking of how Native American cultures used it in a similar way. You see the Kachinas, right? That they are enacting a spiritual journey. Some of them are walking through trauma. Some of them are embodying the sort of tragedies of life. People are born and they die. There is illness. There is danger. And the Kachinas, so that they aren't all joyful, right? And in astrology, we see the same thing. That the astrology isn't there, and of course it's obviously connected back to the Greeks, isn't there to tell us what is going to happen. It's there to help us, guide us and our soul through its journey. And so very, very similar connections there. It's really fascinating.
Well, it is, because when you're telling the stories, they become your story. You watch the stories that are being played on the stage, they become your story. When you're watching a play like Trojan Women, I think it was one of Euripides' most famous, probably his most famous play, and it's taken from not the Greek perspective, but the Trojan perspective. The war in Troy, the Greeks went there, they fought, Troy fell, came down. The Iliad and the Odyssey, for those of you who don't know, that's what the story is all about. And he told it from the perspective of Hecuba, the queen mother who loses everything, loses her children, loses her sons, watches her grandchildren being killed, and all of these women that are going to be mourning the death of their whole life, their whole way of life is gone. It's been destroyed, you know. It's been, a word that we would use today is it's been colonized, right?
Right,
You know, people
yes.
came in, the Greeks
Yes.
came in and they colonized the Trojans,
Right,
all right?
yes.
They took over and they took what wasn't theirs, and that's how, and so this has been going on for a lot longer time.
Right.
And so very similar to what the Native Americans experienced. And she has this wail, this cry, and where she just wails, and it comes from deep within. And if you've ever watched it, it's just, it's a mournful cry. But it connects to every person, every mother, every woman, everyone who, refugee, everyone who's ever experienced the pains and calamities and horrors and atrocities of war, and having lost everything, having been on the other side, not the victor side, on the other side.
On the other side.
What that is, and everybody could connect to it, and you mourn, you cry, because it connects you back to your own sense of your humanity, and seeing it from another perspective. And that's why they were so brilliant in being able to share these stories on stage in a way that helped people to have a greater understanding of themselves and to heal.
So let's do this real quickly. If you're just joining us, you're going to have to watch the first part of the show when I repost it. But thank you for joining the Dr. Elisa Show on KUHS Denver, the stream. We are radio and TV, and please, you can check in with us either way and make comments and interact with us, and we hope you do that. We're talking about trauma on many levels, and I want to return us to what we were just talking about with the way Americans have, and maybe it's not just Americans, but let's say the modern world has framed grief, and how an ancient world perhaps frames grief. I'm thinking of, and this is personal experience, the Jewish traditions around death, right? Everything, so in a more modern tradition, you will have people have celebrations of life. Somebody dies, they have something that's a little more like a party, and we're going to talk about all the good things, and we're not going to cry. You go to a Jewish funeral, and depending how observant that group is, we do things to make you cry. The intention is to make you cry. And so one of the traditions is to rip clothing, and it is the sound of ripping that will often bring out the tears, because a person could be stunned. They could be in a state of sort of traumatic denial around death, and then that ripping will bring out the tears. We physically bury, so coffin is lowered, and everyone there, starting with the immediate family, throws the dirt in, and the sound of the dirt hitting that wooden coffin and echoing, again, you're crying, right? It makes it real. And that it is, I'm not saying that's better, but it's an interesting, different perspective on dealing with grief. Cry, experience it, acknowledge it. Shiva are those 7 days where you are not expected to do anything. Cover the mirrors, wear your old clothes. It sounds awful, but you're actually trying to look like how you feel, right? As opposed to cheering yourself up. Don't cheer yourself up. Go into the grief. That sounds similar to what you're talking about as a healing process.
It is. You have to go into the grief. And that's where the things people don't understand. We shy away from grieving.
Yes.
And grieving, it helps us to stay healthy. It helps us to keep our sense of perspective and understanding. It helps us to acknowledge that this was something that was really important to us, and it hurts to lose it.
Right.
It hurts to no longer have this person in our life.
Right.
It hurts that I lost these men and women in battle. Right. It hurts that I hurt people. It hurts that I had to kill. It hurts that it hurts. It hurts our sense of who we are. We were brought up, many of us were brought up on Judeo-Christian traditions, and one of the first commandments that God says is, don't murder, don't kill, depending upon your translation.
That's right.
And it's the same thing in parts of Islam, don't kill. The same thing with Buddhism and other places, Hinduism. So you have all of these early teachings, and then you're forced to do something that violates your conscience.
That's right.
All right, you are made to do something, or you're because of circumstances, because of politicians, because of other forces, dark forces that are manipulating the situation that we don't know about, that are in the unseen, and we are put in those kinds of circumstances to have to make the best choice we can, and it may be an ugly choice. Or we may say, I know what I'm going to do is wrong, but I'm going to do it anyway. That to me is the moment when the moral injury occurs. That to me is when one of the biggest roots of trauma occurs, is when I violate that within myself. And then when you hurt somebody else, they carry that pain. Like the Trojan women example, and if you don't grieve that in Native American traditions, you pass that pain down to the next generation.
Right.
All right. So what happened with a lot in the Jewish community after the Holocaust? A lot of the people who experienced the Holocaust, they couldn't express that pain because they had to be so locked up, and in the trauma of it, they were in shock. And then it got passed down to the second and third generations. It started to show up, and the studies are remarkable and shocking, and of how these PTSD started to show up in these second and third generations. And so if we understand that, and the Native American believe that it gets passed down in 7 generations. So wow, we've got a lot of trauma that we've got to clear up, and at the core of it is we gotta heal. We gotta be able to grieve. Right. We gotta be able to grieve our losses. Right.
And so this is that splintering you're talking about is something that I call a lineage wound that we pass down. We know that it can happen through epigenetics. If somebody goes through a great deal of trauma, a woman, let's say, goes through an incredible amount of trauma, later is pregnant, her DNA has changed to help her survive that trauma. That change is passed down to these children, right? So my maternal grandmother got out before the war, but her entire family was wiped out. Oh, my God. And so a trauma she never ever talked about, and yet somehow. So let's shift it a little, because we're taught. Go ahead.
No, I just want to add something, and this is the thing. It's when our families hold secrets.
Yes.
That to me is one of our. We need to change that. We need to share our stories. We need to share the stories of the good, the bad, the ugly within our families, and not harbor secrets, because it's our secrets, both personal, both familial, and collective, that poison us. And that poisons our ability to communicate authentically, to be authentic. We carry this malaise, like this sadness that just lingers all the time.
And we may not know where it comes from.
And we don't know where it comes from.
Right.
And that's why we got to stop holding secrets from each other.
Right.
Share the stories. Be honest.
Right. Which starts with being honest with yourself, right? My grandmother could never admit, right, her own pain, and passed it down by being highly judgmental. So that my entire relationship with the grandmother was wanting to get away from her because she was so judgmental of me. And then that wound, for me, right, and this is fascinating. So let's just shift a little, the second half of the show, partly because we are in the celebration of lights of Hanukkah, which actually means dedication, rededication, and it's so funny. This holiday is about not assimilating. And in America, the Hanukkah is assimilated, right? People assimilate with Christmas, and it's so different. But the holiday itself is about, and we talked about this, that single candles can chase away the light. And yet, the light needs the darkness to exist. We don't, right? We don't see the light when we're in the light. You've got to have the darkness to be able to experience that light. And so there's an interesting dance. And there's an interesting dance with trauma, with stress, with challenges and growth. That we know people, in my life I know people who seem to have these blessed lives. There was enough money, there was kindness, they never pushed against anything in their entire life. The doors just opened. And they didn't develop any character.
Mm-hmm.
They have nothing they were committed to or willing to stand for. And that's not true of everybody who has that life, but I've definitely seen that pattern. So I just want to talk about that. Too much trauma, obviously, right? We've talked about that. No trauma, no stress, a whole other kind of wound that you end up with. How do we get to that weird balance? That's where they can dance together.
Yeah, it's recognizing, and it's such a big point that you're making here, and I hope our audience is being able to grasp how important it is for both the light and the dark to dance together in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be in its toxic forms, or doesn't have to go into its, evil form. And there is that's when it gets denied. When we deny that sense of it in ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And we project that out into the world, and it often comes back at us as evil and other things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to deny that it does exist, but we have to be in harmony with ourselves, with our light and shadow aspects, and that they dance together.
They dance together. And can I say too, and I'll let you go on, that the shadow side is not always bad or evil.
No, it's
right?
not.
I mean, that some of your greatness can be within your shadow,
Mm-hmm.
and great evil can come out of what looks like pure light when it starts.
Mm-hmm.
That if we don't have that dance, either side can mislead us.
Yes, absolutely. If you're all just light and love and everything like that, you are just inviting and enabling evil to happen, quite
Right.
frankly.
I
Because
can forgive everything. I'm only seeing the good in. Somebody said
bunch
to me,
of bliss bunnies.
Yeah,
You're going to be led to the slaughter.
well, somebody said to me, there really is no evil. It's just things we don't understand. Like, you're not Jewish.
No, exactly. You haven't read Eli Wiesel.
Yeah.
Oh my
right.
gosh, read his book, Night.
Right. Or Viktor Frankl.
Or Viktor Frankl, yes.
Yes.
Or Frankl, yeah.
However, I never met him. I don't know how to say it. Right?
Yes, you've never read that. Read it.
Yes.
It exists.
There is evil. Now you have choices what to do in the face of evil.
Right.
Allowing it, which looks like light,
Mm-hmm.
right? I can forgive. I can be in a holy place, even though bad things are happening. That's nice on one level.
You're
but
just blinding yourself.
Yes.
You're putting blinders on.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do we do that? Because that sounds more comforting.
It does. People like to live in a bubble because
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to look at some of the pain in life.
Mm-hmm.
It just is, and so they go into it. If you don't have a relationship and an understanding with the suffering of life,
Right.
with disease, with pain, with starvation, with
Right, yes.
if you don't have a relationship and you understand what you block that out. It doesn't exist in my world.
Right.
Then it leads you to extremism. It
Yes.
leads you to perversions. It leads
Yes.
you to that. You don't have a balance within you.
Mm-hmm.
So you become enablers of things that wouldn't happen because you won't say, oh my gosh, this is happening. People are starving around the world, and we could actually do something about it. We don't have to let these people, we have the resources, the Western countries, we have the resources to end this if we wanted to. Why don't we do that?
Mm-hmm.
Because so many people, it's not our problem, it's not this.
And I have to add that some people don't see it because there's a psychological element of, I believe most of the world lives like I do, right? There's just that's a sort of, and unless you actually see it in front of you,
Yeah.
you don't know it's there, which sounds silly, but it's so very accurate.
Well, and then the people that live in those bubbles, the bliss bunny bubbles, where everything is okay and they've had everything, they've had a silver spoon and everything went right in their life and all that. They live in a distorted reality.
Mm-hmm.
I remember this one time, and they can't affect any good in this reality because it creates a sense of entitlement and narcissism. So everything works out, everything this, that. I've been given this golden spoon, And I remember one time I was working for this bakery out in Los Angeles called Sweet Lady Jane. And I was delivering cakes. I was an actor and I was working, and this is just what you do. We have to, we do this. And so I had to deliver this cake, this big cake, to these ginormous house up in Bel Air.
Hollywood Hills, Bel Air.
The Bel Air area. It was a huge home, and it was owned by one of the Saudi princes. All right, and I drive up to this place. We had really good cakes, and world famous cakes. People all over would come to have those cakes. And I drove up to this house, and they had 40 cars, you know, the most elaborate, expensive things. And I'm walking in, and you know, people are laying down on the, you know, people are fanning them. They've got all the servants working in the house, and they're laying out in these gold dresses and different things. And I'm like, and I'm talking to the owner or what have you, and I'm engaging, but I'm just taking this all in. And that very same day, I went down to Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles because we did this. I worked for a number of years with an organization called the Mindful Warrior Project. And we would do once a month, we'd go down and work mindfulness practices for the veterans that were living on Skid Row. And so I saw this huge dichotomy, and these people could never relate to what's happening on the ground. To the people who are experiencing the deep suffering of life. And I think it's because when everything goes well for you and you're not challenged, you're not experiencing stress, you're not experiencing anything that pushes you to grow outside of your bubble, you're going to just be so disconnected from reality and the life around you that that doesn't exist for you.
Right. It's why we hear people talk about something traumatic that happened to them and then say on some levels this was a gift. Because from this I became aware, from this I grew, from this I embraced a different reality, a different spiritual journey. From this trauma, from this pain, I became more aware, right? It is an interesting thing. And this isn't just about, I mean, you have very wealthy families who have autistic children, right? I mean, it's not about blanket, money. It's about, I think, life choices. What have you been given, and then what do you choose in response to that? You're given great wealth, you're given great health. Okay, how are you going to use that? Maybe with great gift comes some kind of obligation, right? It's a very, very different.
And it's with the obligation that it comes with, it's also a sense of willingness to recognize that other people don't have it as good as you do.
Right.
You know,
right.
And to be able to move outside of those bubbles, so that we can't deal with the challenges we have in life, and we have a lot of challenges right now, unless we can look at it honestly and truthfully and accurately. And that's going to create, in the immediacy, a trauma, because you're going to be looking at the truth of life.
Yes.
And you're going to look at the suffering, and you're going to look at the things that a lot of people are going through, or injustices that may be happening, or climate changes and species, whatever it may be.
Right.
You're going to have to look at it, and that's going to create a trauma. All right. But what are you going to do with that? Right. And so people don't want to go through that because it requires you to change. A trauma requires you to change in some way. And if you don't change, you can't grow out of it. You will stay stuck. For some people, you might even die because of it.
Right.
But it necessitates a change. You can no longer go back to the way you were before. But people don't want to do that because it requires effort. It requires effort.
I mean, I do think it's frightening. Yeah. What if this challenges my belief about life, and oh my gosh, my belief in my spiritual life has got to change because it doesn't actually work. I've acted in this way my whole life, and now I realize those behaviors could have hurt people, were inappropriate, or were fine for, my teenage life, but not fine for my adult life. And I think it's I think it's just so difficult. There is, and obviously there's extreme trauma, war. There's this, what we call trauma, right, which is that mixture of life challenges. 2020 is a great example. Some people, I was very blessed in 2020, right? I was not financially challenged in 2020, and I was able to stay safe. That is not everybody's story.
Oh God, no.
For 2020.
No.
By any means, right?
No.
And I think that saying it's how you choose to deal with it is true, and yet what I had to deal with was less traumatic
Yes.
than what other people had to deal with. And admitting that then also requires a change within me.
Yes, it has to. And that gives you compassion. That gives you something that can help you to open your heart up to say, and we don't always get to choose what happens to us or why it happens to us.
Right.
But we do get to choose how we respond to it.
Right.
And we may have gotten a really terrible hand in life. I certainly have had my challenges, I've had my blessings, and it's just a matter of going every day and really doing everything you can to say, all right, I'm going to grow through this challenge.
Right.
I'm going to go through this trauma. I'm going to see this. Wow, this is coming into my life for a reason, and I'm going to either meet the challenge or I'm not. And I want to meet the challenge. And some days, I'm not going to meet it.
Right.
Some days I'm gonna fall flat on my face, and I'm gonna have to pick myself up or wipe. I'm gonna have to cry. I'm gonna have to scream or whatever. Maybe I take a pause for a little bit, but then I'm gonna get back up again and keep going. And that's the attitude, and that's what I think we miss when we're confronted with the little traumas and the little stresses we have in our life that are meant to help us grow.
It's so fascinating. I think that what I hear people say often is, like, why me when something goes wrong, right? And I have to say, one of my friends, they're always saying, everything happens for a reason. And once I said, yeah, because I did something stupid. That was the reason that happened. Like, let me own it, right? If I don't put gas in the car, it's going to run out of gas. So why me? Because I messed up. And willingness to admit that is good. But I have to say there's another side that I've discovered. And that is when something amazing happens to me. Why me?
Yes.
Right? Why am I so blessed? And when I ask that question, and again, I've had New Agey friends go, oh, because you manifested it. I'm like, what? That's nice, but why did it work for me? Why me? There's hundreds of thousands of people who would die, kill for, or beg for the life I have. Why me? And I think that also reminds me that my heart has been shattered, and it is the spaces where light comes in, where love comes in, where God perhaps comes in, and that then says, use that compassion elsewhere. So not just acknowledging the trauma, but acknowledging the blessing, right? Where, and some of it's just luck.
Yeah, it is, and you can have all the, and I love my New Age friends too, and they got some really good stuff. I mean, they got some really good stuff. There's not to deny. There's some things that I question, because I think that when you think about it in those terms, where I just manifested it right here, and it's like a gift bag, and I think that's that understanding of our thoughts create reality. Is a bigger mystical truth. Yes. And we're reducing it to like a gift bag. Like a gift bag from Santa Claus. I'm just ask Santa to give it to me. And I think it's much bigger than that. And it is helping us to understand the forces of creation in a way that is much larger and much more mystical. And I think we're looking at it, and this is an opinion from we haven't matured enough to really understand that, the power behind that.
Right. And
we're still looking at it like adolescence.
Well, we see it in every mystical tradition. The Kabbalah, the questions really are, how was this place created, and what am I supposed to do? Why am I here?
Why am I here?
Right.
What's the purpose of my life?
And most people stop any kind of religious, spiritual, true learning, when they're 13, 14, 15. And that's our view, right? So that I will have friends who said to me, I can't believe that you practice a religion because religion, all the wars in the planet have been fought because of religion. I'm like, no, actually they were fought for property and for resources and washed in religion so that you could make people go do things that were morally against.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That's how you taint, that's how you shade it. But really, it's some dude wants that other piece of land.
That's basically what it was.
Right?
Yes.
Or do that.
You have something that I want, and I'm going to come take it.
And I'm going to come take it. And
That's
you're going
it.
to defend yourself, and we're going to have a war.
We're going to have a war, and who wins,
Yeah.
we'll take that property
Right.
or keep it.
Right. But and religion just becomes the varnish
Yes.
on it. So can you believe we have 4 minutes
Oh my gosh.
left? I know. How did this happen? How did this just time? So what I like to always end with is what still inspires you, because again, Renaissance is spirit.
Yeah.
What still inspires you in life?
Oh, I think nature. Nature inspires me. Great performances. Watching great performances of people celebrating and expressing their artistic qualities. Seeing a great performance on stage or on film. Seeing children laughing, inspires me. I love to see when the human spirit is able to be free to express itself.
Yes.
And allowed not to be suppressed. I think so much of our existence is moving towards some kind of constriction toward freedom and love. And when you see that, when you witness it with, and these are just some examples, but when you see it happen, when you see someone break free, when you see someone who is caught in the moment of exhilaration and rapture and ecstasy for their life, my gosh, that's inspiring. And it gives us hope that I think that we're all searching for on a deep core level. There's this sense of individuation and freedom and love.
And permission, perhaps, that we have to give ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? To be exuberant, to be expressive, to be loved. Right? They don't have to earn the right for those.
And one of the great things to get to is when and it's connected to self-worth. That I'm enough just the way I am. My voice is fine. My skill sets are fine. My all of that is fine. And when you're coming from that place of I don't need anybody else's permission to be me.
Right. And that is that authentic self that I talk about, as opposed to, and I'm not knocking the books on like how to be your best self, 101 tips. There's always gotta be a number on how to be better, on make sure you do this. And my joke, honestly, is if I do all those things, I have no time. I wake up in the morning, right, and I do this, and I keep going, and right, and that there's so much that we seem to think we have to do. And I have to say, I think that distracts us. Again, I think it's a different kind of addiction. Right? If I'm addicted to a belief that every word I say manifests the life I'm craving, it's an addiction keeping me from whatever that fear, that deep fear is inside me.
But it makes you, if you don't create that, it makes you, it becomes a shame-based system where all of a sudden there's something wrong with me.
Absolutely.
I must not be doing this right. Wow, I can't do it. So now, again, it feeds that sense of I'm not enough.
Right. I did something wrong.
I did something wrong.
So this has been amazing.
It has been.
And it's been an entire show. We'll have to do it again.
Yes,
and build on this. If you have been listening, I'm sure you have been moved as greatly as we have in this conversation. And I'd love to hear your comments. You can find me at alisarobin.com. That is my website. You can find me on Facebook, Alisa Robin, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Instagram. I'm not sure where else. Oh, here. Charlie, where can everyone find you?
You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on my LinkedIn. Also, coresoulhealing.com. That's my website. I have some classes that are coming up. We've got a retreat in next
Awesome.
year. That's going to be
Mhm.
August 2022. So you can sign up. We're going to be opening registration for that in January. And so, yeah, just look me up there.
Awesome. And I'm also on Amazon. Remember, you can go pre-order my
Oh,
book.
that's right.
Yeah, and then have it ready to read. So
Dark Fire.
yes. So thank you for joining us. And you know how I'd love to end this show. I would love to know how you feel. I'd love to know the questions you walked away with. If you walked away with more questions than answers, this was a great show. That is the point. So in 2 weeks, I'll be talking about this experience of writing and encouraging everyone who wants to be an author to sit down and put words to paper. Until then, stay hopeful, stay healthy, and most importantly, stay inspired.